Stolaroff.
I'm the one that wrote that, so I called myself an expert. So it's really, I'm like a no-budget ego that calls himself an expert. Anyway, I'm sorry. So as you might know, you may be familiar with my class. It's a 2-day class. I'm normally used to speaking for 14 hours. So I'm going to try to do the 30-minute thing. We'll see how well I do. It's not something that I'm all that used to. And the other thing is I had to come up with a PowerPoint presentation. Normally I do Keynote, which is kind of more creative. So I thought in the spirit of doing this kind of a PowerPoint, my theme today is how to kind of take control of your career, to how to, like, what I say, not wait for permission to be a screenwriter or to be a filmmaker, but to really take control of your career. So in the kind of spirit of PowerPoint, I want to try to figure out a kind of metaphor, and PowerPoint gives you all these, like, tools, but they're like business, for business presentations. So I thought this looked very businessy. These steps to self-sufficiency, and I have this little stare that they gave me in the PowerPoint. But I think this works actually. It's a really good metaphor for what I'm going to talk about. So the first step, and you'll see there's 6 steps there. The first step, in my opinion, to self-sufficiency, to controlling your career, would be to think like a producer. So this is pretty simple, and I'm sure a lot of you already do this, or you're familiar with this. You've heard this kind of idea that if you're a screenwriter, to think like a producer. What are producers looking for? What do they, what do they want in their scripts? Start thinking like that. It's important, probably, also to know which producers to think like. So if you're thinking like a producer who produces $150 million films, that's probably not going to work as well. I'm assuming if you're in this room, you probably don't have access to those producers. And so if you don't have access to producers that make big movies, you need to think like a low-budget producer, because those are the people that you're actually going to be able to get your script to. So be thinking about what they're looking for. As an example of what they may be looking for, I'm on Jeff Gunn's info list, and many of you may be on that info list. So you get all these emails every day about different things, and about once a week there's an email from a production company looking for material. So as an example, I just pulled these kind of randomly, not randomly, but I pulled them within the last month. These are all projects that, script requests. These are people that you have access to. You don't have an agent, you don't have to have a script, you don't have to be in the WGA, you don't have to be a somebody. You can submit scripts to these companies looking for these kinds of movies. And if you see they're looking for supernatural horror, a crime script, a regular horror, and I find it interesting that the regular horror, absolutely no comedy. Like, don't make that funny. But anyway, a horror film and an action film, you can see that, a couple of those mentioned the budget's not to exceed $2 million. In one case, not to exceed $1 million, and then this last one over here, not to exceed $500,000. And in fact, I think I saw one 2 or 3 days ago that was not to exceed $100,000. So these are, they're looking for things to be made on very little bit of money. All of these mention limited locations, so that's something else to be thinking about. I'm going to write a script, I'm going to make sure it doesn't cost a lot of money, I'm going to limit the locations. They mention over here specific locations, and they mention a small number of principal actors. So you can look at this and you can think, okay, I'm going to start to write with these things in mind. And does this work to do that, to think like a producer and write a script like that? Well, I'm not a writer. I should have said this up front. I'm not a writer. I teach no-budget filmmaking, but I'm not even really an instructor. I'm a producer. That's what I am. So of course I'm going to ask you to think like a producer and do this kind of thing. But my girlfriend is a writer. She's not a producer. She decided she's a writer because she decided a year ago she was going to be a screenwriter. So she wrote a script with all this in mind. She didn't take an exact ad, but she said, I think low-budget comedy, low-budget horror films sell, one location, small number of characters, and she wrote that script. And the whole time she was writing that script, she was consciously thinking, how much was this going to cost? Which is not something that a writer generally does. I mean, I would tell you, we weren't in this conversation, write the best script you can, But she was writing to get the film made. So she was thinking about that all the time and like thinking about where she was going to shoot it even, And I'm like, well, it's not, let that be up to the producer where you're going to shoot it. So she wrote it that way, and then she was done and she started submitting it to whoever she could submit it to. She's got 2 people that want to make that script, her first script. And it's a pretty good script, but I can't tell you it's the world's greatest script, but she has 2 people that are going to make it because they can make it for very little money. And it's a horror film, it's a commercial film, and it can be done on a little bit of money. So this is a good, viable way to kind of control your career, but you may be thinking a couple of different things. You may be thinking, well, first of all, just because I'm doing this and writing that script doesn't exactly mean that film's going to get made. I mean, her film may not get made. She's got 2 people interested in making it, one is a company, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. And 2, if you're like me, you may be thinking, what if I don't want to write this kind of a movie? I mean, these are all genre films. And generally speaking, these kind of lower budget films that people are going to ask for, the producers are looking for, are kind of genre films. And you may not want to write that kind of film. Maybe you write comedy and you can't fit comedy into any of these, especially that horror script that says no comedy horror script. So what do you do? Okay, well then that's where my next step on the the little stair step thing goes, take this one step further and don't just think like a producer, but actually be a producer. That's what I teach in my class, is how to be a producer. So now you're probably thinking, well, I don't want to be a producer. I'm just a writer. That's what I do. I'm just a writer. And I would say to you, first of all, if you wrote that script and no one paid you to write it, you're already a producer, right? You're already a producer. So why stop there? Why not continue on and see it all the way through? It's also good if you have material that's particular and you don't want someone to mess it up. And producers are good at doing that, messing up things. If you're the producer, then you can kind of control what happens to that material. But again, we're talking about self-sufficiency, so that's the idea there. So decide to be a producer. Producers need 2 things to produce. They need material. You guys are good. We're good there. You already have the material. And they need money. So now you're probably thinking, well, I don't have any money to make a movie. I don't want to raise money. I don't like doing that. I have no interest in raising money. And if you're like that, then I can empathize with you, because that's exactly how I feel. That's why I've had the weird career I've had, is because I have no interest in raising money. I would rather put my time into making movies and telling stories than raising money. So my advice to you, if you feel that way, is to become a no-budget filmmaker, which is the whole kind of thing that I teach. So, first of all, when I teach my class, people take the class and they get hung up on this idea of no budget, like what exactly, how much money is no budget? And I have a very specific definition of what no budget filmmaking is. And I would ask you, what do you guys think that amount of money is in no budget? Is it literally $0 or is it something else? What do you think no budget is?
50,000.
50,000. That's the number?
Or less. The number you have to work with.
Did you take my class? You're not supposed to do that. So she jumped the gun. Well, so anyway, the amount of money that you have in your pocket to make a movie with is my definition of the kind of no budget level. So to take it for what we're talking about here, no budget filmmaking is making a film with the resources you have available to you right now. So it's not about raising money. If you take my class, one of the first things I will tell you is I'm not going to teach you how to raise money, other than maybe talking about Kickstarter, which is different. But I'm not going to tell you how to put a business plan together or go to companies and try to get money, because I don't know how to do that. I don't do that for a living. I will teach you how to make a movie with the amount of money you have available to you right now. This is I have these things in my class called Write It Down rules. And the Write It Down rules are very big picture, important but big picture rules. And one of the first big picture Write It Down rules in my class is to create within the framework of available resources. So when you're a no-budget filmmaker, that's what you're doing. You're not starting with the story first. You may have a vague idea of some stories you want to tell or some things you want to express, but you're starting with your resources first and building the story around your resources. So I didn't make this up. You've probably heard this a million times. Every great no-budget film that you've heard of or seen has been done, they've done this process. And the most famous one, of course, is El Mariachi, Robert Rodriguez, because he wrote a book about it, essentially, called Rebel Without a Crew. And the story is very, very well known. He had zero money to make a movie. He gave himself up to do this, like he was a lab rat for a month, and was in this hospital where he was doing this like testing, and they paid him like $7,000 to do this like test on himself. And while he was in there, he wrote a script around the things that he had available to him. So he had a school bus, and he had a bar, and he wrote a script around those things. So that's essentially what you're going to be doing. You're going to basically make a resource assessment, and you're going to say, what things do I have to make a movie with? So those are things that are going to be that are going to be in your script, like costumes and props and vehicles and locations, which is a big one here. Actors, you may have actor friends, or you may have really interesting people that you think would be good on screen. Those are other things you're going to write into your script. And then you have stuff like equipment that maybe you're a still photographer and you own a Canon 5D Mark II or Mark III. That's a camera that's a perfectly viable camera to make a film with. That might be something that you kind of think about as you're writing your script. Match the aesthetic of the equipment that you have. You maybe have some crew member friends that you want to kind of, again, you're not writing into your script, but you're thinking about them as you're writing your script. And then you're going to have that little bit of cash, whatever that is. And I would recommend that's not your last dollar that you're going to put in. This is like the dollar that you can throw away and it's not going to hurt you. But you have that money, and that money is used to fill in the gaps, right? So if you write your script for everything that you have, then you have no gaps. But it's hard to do that, and you may write for a location that you have access to, but then there's another scene that takes place in a location you don't have access to, and you might need a little bit of money to rent that location, and so that's what your money is used for, to kind of fill in those gaps. So that's creating within the framework of available resources. But again, we have the stair-step thing. Let's take this one step further and think about letting your resources fuel your imagination. All right, so let me give you an example. The idea of this is to let you have this kind of unique set of resources, right? I don't know what things you have to make a movie with and what things you have to make a movie with, but I can assure you they're different, right? So you have your weird things and you have your weird things, and you write them down and you're thinking about, like, these are the things I'm going to make my movie with. Let that unique set of resources inspire and influence or take you down a kind of unique story path. So here's an example of how that might work. So let's say you have a 63 Corvette, and it's blue. It's a real shiny lacquer paint blue with a white convertible top. It has chrome pipes out the back. It has the original 63 chrome wheel. It's a very specific resource. It's a very specific piece of production value. And the great thing about, if I own this and I want to write it in my script, is it's free production value for me. If someone else wanted to write a script with this, and the lead character drives a 62 Corvette, that would cost them money to go and rent that or find that car. I have that, it's free production value. But what I'm asking you is not just to think of it as generic production value that adds like production value to your movie, but think about where that piece, that one specific piece of resource or production value, where is that going to take you story-wise? So first thing I might think is, oh, okay, well, I'm going to make a movie about set in the 60s, and I have this character, and he drives this Corvette, and it's set in the 60s, and then I'm thinking, wait, he told me not to write, write for what I have. I don't have a lot of 60s outfits and production design to fit that, so maybe doing a period piece isn't right, but what if I had a character who drove that car and was from the 60s, and then he was jettisoned into the future, which is the present, and I could make this film that was kind of a comment on where we've come as far as this goes or that goes, and all of a sudden, this one very specific piece of resource that I have is influencing the entire direction of a story. It's sending me all the way over here. So be thinking like that. This is where your resources can really fuel your imagination. So, as an example, if you're not sure if this is done, who saw the film Bellflower? Anybody see that film? One person. Two people.
I know the guy who did it.
You know the guy that did it? Awesome. He was a guest speaker in my class. Evan and Vince. So Bellflower, for those of you who don't know, was a very, very successful no-budget film. It was in Sundance a couple of years ago. It was made for $15,000. It was shot over a 2-year period. It was picked up at Sundance by Oscilloscope. They released it theatrically. It was probably the most successful no-budget film of that year. They were working on a new film. They just raised a bunch of money the director raised a bunch of money on Indiegogo to make his next film, and the producer's off making stuff, and they have a whole career now because this film was very successful. This is a great example of having weird things in your kind of collection of resources. They don't have to be weird things. He had a 1972 Buick Skylark, so not a 63 Corvette, but his car actually has flames that come out of the back of it, so that was kind of an interesting thing. They know how to make their own flamethrowers, and other weird things. So they had this kind of weird stuff that they could make or that they had access to that didn't cost them anything. And they created a very unusual script, a really unique script, not a generic movie at all, not the crime, horror, thriller, whatever kind of thing. This is a movie that would be almost impossible to categorize. Look at you can't see the quote, I don't even think I can read it. The quote up there is something like, mixes John Hughes with, Apocalypse Now or something. I mean, there's no way to define this movie. It's a very unique movie because it comes out of his mind also, but a unique set of resources influencing the story. Okay, so we have our last step. Take this one step further. We take this whole thing one step further. It would be to not only let your resources fuel your imagination, but let your limitations also fuel your creativity. So this is something that in my class I spend 30 or 40 minutes talking about because there's there's a little exercise that I do and all this kind of stuff. It's a really important idea, but the rule in my class is, the write down rule is to embrace your limitations. This is one of the first things I teach because it's really important. It's if you want to make a no-budget film and you're the producer, and let's not say you're the screenwriter, but you're the producer, and you don't do this, it's going to be miserable and you're not going to be very successful. So embracing your limitations is accepting the limitations and working with those limitations and not against them. That's the first kind of way of accepting, of embracing limitations. But the kind of more interesting and the next level way of embracing your limitations is to find the advantages inherent in that particular limitation. So it's that whole thing of your limitation equals an opportunity. That whole Chinese word is the same, or I'm not even sure if that's true, but that's what people say. So one way to do this, and this is something I kind of talk about in my class, is to stop thinking about your limitations as obstacles or as restrictions to suffer from, and start thinking of your limitations as rules to live by. And because we're much better with rules. We deal with rules every day. Every day we stop at a stoplight, right? We don't just run all the stoplights. We're okay with rules. We don't like limitations, but we're okay with rules. So just think of your limitations as rules. These are the rules I'm going to make my film by. So I'll give you an example of this is the film that you may have heard of, you may have seen. It's a film that I worked on. When I worked for a company that gave finishing funds, and we gave this film finishing funds, and this director went off and he's made a bunch of other films. I don't know if you've heard of Chris Nolan since, but anyway, this film though was made for $12,000. He shot it on 16, back before digital video, for $6,000, and then he made a 16mm print for another $6,000, $12,000. I can guarantee you, he never had $12,000 at one time. His first rule, but it was really a limitation, was he said, I'm not going to go into debt. I think he made another film, which you will never hear about or read about. He told me about it, that didn't work out. A film before this that he never finished, that I'm sure he put money into. He probably did go into debt, and he never finished it, and he just abandoned the film. And then for this next film, he said, I'm not going into debt. I can't do that anymore. I'm not going to put it on a credit card. I'm not going to raise any money from people or borrow money from people. That was his first limitation. That's a pretty difficult one, right? So he figured out, he had a day job. He worked 5 days a week. At a post place, and he figured out at the end of the week he had just enough money to be able to buy film stock to shoot for one day. So he said, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to shoot on Saturdays for this one day, and then I'll work 5 days and I'll shoot the next Saturday. So now this is a limitation that most people go, well, I can't. How do you do that? I can't make a film that way. So some people might just stop. But rather than just stop, he said, well, how can I work with this? How can I kind of embrace this, right? So first thing he realized, of course, you're only going to shoot Saturdays, and it took him a year of shooting like 22 Saturdays to make the film, that he was going to have continuity issues. So rather than suffer from the continuity issues, he intentionally wrote the script out of order so that no one would catch the continuity issues. And if you've seen the film, like I've seen it probably 20 times, you can see the haircuts changing and the different issues with this shooting over the period of time. As one actor shaved his head in the middle of the shooting, and they had to wait a few months, but they could only wait so long, and then it was kind of not grown back, and you can tell. Okay, is it really only 5? Well, I'm almost done. And so anyway, so this solved the problem. But if you know anything about this film and how successful it was and why it was successful, it was lauded for that exact reason, for the unique structure that it came up with. So this is a limitation that is influencing his story textually, and it's the great thing about the movie. And this set off a whole career. So don't let your limitations, keep you from doing what you need to do. Work with those limitations. Find something interesting to solve that problem. And that problem is, most people don't do that work. If you do that work and you're creative and you're solving that problem, it might be the one thing that makes your script really interesting. So anyway, so that's kind of what I have. Here's my steps to self-sufficiency. Again, you can just think like a producer, but if you really want to take this to the next level and go to the next step and go a little further, become a producer. Be the actual producer of your film. Write for what you have. Be excited about that process, and let those limitations and those resources, that unique set of that unique situation that you're in, let that influence and inspire your writing, and see what direction it takes you. And then you'll not only be able to make something for very little money, but you might have something at the end of the day that would be more interesting and more creative than what you might have had otherwise. So that's my thing. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer. Not a single question. That all made total sense, I guess.
Why did you produce your own movie?
I knew that was going to be. I was like, I'm going to say this, and someone's going to have to ask that question. It's a good question. Do you have a relationship? Are you in a relationship? Or have you been in a relationship?
Yes, so yeah,
that's one reason. Because it's like, I have to sleep with that person every night. I want to make sure, we're not fighting over a project, which, and frankly, the real answer to that question is, and that's a very real answer, but I was, at the time she finished that script, she was like, okay, let's go. And I'm like, I'm buried under finishing my last movie, working on this movie, teaching my class. There was no way I could do anything on it. And she knows a lot of people, she meets people, and she always gets their cards and all this stuff. She cuts hair, and that's how she meets people. She's met everybody at every rung of the film business or whatever, and she just started sending it out. I'm like, I don't think you should do it that way, but if you want it, I didn't want to stop her or keep her from doing it. So she just sent it to whoever she knew, and that's how it happened for her. So that's another maybe piece of advice. Just, it's not advice I would necessarily give, but it worked for her. So, although I could come back and produce that script. If it doesn't happen, I may do that. So, I like the script. Yeah.
I should clarify, I have not taken Mark's class specifically, but I have taken his partner Tom Provost's classes. And these guys are amazing.
That's right, you haven't taken my class.
Yeah, I'm just, I can't see back there.
I can barely see you. Yeah.
They are amazing, and what they will teach you in just a matter of a couple days really is applicable. You can take it with you and get started. So, and I think you did a great job on this.
But you have to stop talking about how to owe you more money and.
Yeah,
No.
I think the ticket to the concert.
Well, I thought you did take my class, but you didn't take it. You took Tom's. Real questions? Not about my relationship in my class. I'm sure you guys have some kind of yes.
So while it's nice to make something that's low budget, let's get to the meat and potatoes. You need to sell it. You're in it to make money. You're in it to.
You may be in it to make money.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the first thing. If you take my class, one of the first things, like right after my bio, which is hopefully the least interesting thing in my class, is you are not going to make money making a low budget film. You're just not. First of all, you will probably not make money making a whole range of budgets after no budget. But the point of making a no budget film is not to make money. It's to help launch your career. It's to get better at your craft. I go through all the reasons later in my class of why you would make a no budget film, and I have guest speakers who come in who've been successful. Jay Duplass will come in and tell you, don't make a no-budget film because you're planning to make money. I don't think he made money until he did Cyrus, probably. I don't think he even made money on Bagging It. And those were very small films, and they got out there in the world. But that's not the reason to make it. It's to help launch your career, and you're not going to be good at this right off the bat. Chris Nolan wasn't. I talk about another film in my class, Craig Brewer's first film, which he made a film before his first film that you haven't even seen, which is actually the second film. It was a complete abysmal bomb that he never finished also because he didn't know what he was doing, and he learned from those mistakes, and then he made the next film for $5,000 and really worked out how to become a filmmaker. Now that's to be a director, but I think as a writer too, it helps to see your material go all the way through to the end. maybe you decide you want to direct it too. But I'm not telling you you have to direct it. I have a lot of people that take my class who are writer-producers. Some of them are actor-writer-producers. But they've written something, they are a producer, they own material, and now it's just a matter of finding directors. There are directors out there who don't write, who are independent film directors, and they're looking for material, and they want somebody who's got a script, who's willing to kind of help raise money. But if you're not spending a lot of money, then making money isn't a big deal. Getting it out there is a big deal, and no-budget filmmaking is a terrific way to launch a career. And I do a whole slide in my class of all the filmmakers that you've heard of that make studio films now, and all the no-budget films that you've never heard of that got them to the level, to the film that you did hear of. So Mark Forster, who did James Bond movie, made a little film that none of you have seen that helped him get Monsters Ball, that put him on the map to now he's doing World War Z and whatever. So that would be my answer to that.
It could also be the last time you check and see control of everything.
That's exactly another thing that I say as well. I mean, you will, as a writer, you were infamously never getting any control and get shit on by everybody, and so this is your one chance, and not today. One more question?
When's your next class?
Great. I didn't pay for that either. It's in November. I'm teaching my class November 9th and 10th, and then Tom's class is the next weekend, which is whatever, 7 days is the 16th and 17th of November. So
You got a card?
I do, somewhere in my bag, yes. Thank you very much.
Wasn't that wonderful information? Mark Stolaroff.